G'day mates, Nate the Aussie here. How you all doing? I'm here with a couple of contacts of mine, I would say. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a second. Basically what we're here to do, we're here to discuss a few different concepts to do with Asian martial arts, specifically to do with historical Japanese, Korean, and Chinese martial arts. But you guys know me, if you're watching me on my channel, but I'll just get these guys to introduce themselves. So, someone take it away.
Alright, I guess I'll go ahead and start. So, my name's Keith. I run a channel known as the Scholar General.墨将点兵. I have to say the Chinese name, which is obligatory.
That's right.
Basically I study historical Chinese martial arts and how living tradition of Chinese martial arts connects to history.
Hey guys, I'm Nathan, also known as Bug. I run the YouTube channel Just a Bug, and I also run the Korean Historic Fencing School, the Sydney Korean Historic Fencing. And so my area of interest is Korean Historic Fencing, specifically Jeokgum, and we'll see how this goes.
For those people who are watching this, what I did is I forwarded Keith and Nath actually a couple of images that I've been going through. Now, I'll actually put the links of where you can get these books in the description. They're really easy to get. There's 6 different texts that I was looking through for similarities and connections between them, so it took a bit of time to write these down, because every single time I found a similarity in one book, I had to look through all the others to see if I could find it or not. But basically, we're looking through 6 different texts, and we're going to be looking, these are sort of Korean, Japanese, and Chinese texts, and sort of within about 100 years of each other, at least, I would say, and looking at, do we think things are similar? Do we think they're different? Why not, etc. Because I'm sure you guys would agree, right, at least in our discussions we've had, that there does seem to be some kind of bridge between, I suppose, historical Chinese and historical Korean and historical Japanese martial arts. The question is, what is that bridge and how extensive was it, right?
Yeah. Biggest question being, why do the Japanese texts not use humans?
Yeah, the Tengu scroll is a bit of an interesting trip, I'll admit that.
There is in the Ming Dynasty military encyclopedia, the Wu Bei Zhi, there is a section where it contains like a reprint of so Qi Jiguang got the Kage-ryu scroll, and then there's a reprint of his version also in the Wu Bei Zhi, except it uses monkeys.
Monkey.
Oh no, I did come across that. Holy crap! Yeah, no, I do remember that now.
That's a thing too, which is funny because some of the technique names reference monkeys or apes.
Yeah, well, it's circling monkey and leaping monkey or something like that. I can actually imagine that they're looking at the Tengu and they're like, what the hell are these things? And they come across the word monkey and they're like, oh, they must be monkeys. But look, what we'll do is we'll just have a look at the first couple of images and we'll see. So this is Secrets of the Japanese Art of Warfare, School of Certain Victory. So this one was written by Kansuke, I believe, in the late 1550s, very beginning of the 1560s. And it talks about various different things. It talks about grappling. It even mentions Ei or Batto a little bit as well. Pole arms, which we'll get to actually, those are interesting. But here's the first guard that we've got here. The next picture talks about specifically what you can do in that guard. Now, there are 2 versions of this text. One is a lot more detailed. This one's kind of like, here's the guard, and here are a bunch of dot points that you can talk about. Well, that you can do with that guard as well. It doesn't really go into a huge amount of detail.
Yep.
Then we have this. Now, this is from the Muedobo Tongji. I butchered that pronunciation. I do apologize, but it's from that. Which section is it?
This is Kyojunbo.
All right. So Thoughts on that? No, so you thinking there's some kind of crossover there from what you've seen?
I pretty much only do Jirokum. I have dabbled in Kyojunbo before, but I've just found it to be, because for context, then Kyojunbo takes a lot of the previous texts and then makes these exercises as part of drill.
Yeah.
And I don't know how good they are as actual drills, or at least I haven't found a good way to do them, because I feel like a lot of them are quite large motions, the way that they're described, or at least for them to work. So it's a text that I don't do or teach very much.
Because the reason why I thought of this, I mean, obviously keeping probably not the footwork necessarily, because the way the feet are in both images is a little bit different, but generally this position here, I mean, obviously it's a two-handed weapon. You see a lot of these kinds of positions with two-handed blades, obviously, but I don't know. I just found that in the Korean text, and I found that kind of interesting. But is there a position like that as well, recycled in the text that you also look at, Nathan, as well?
You'll have to refresh my memory on what they're doing in this particular drill, but there is a position where it's a counter stab, so you block and then you're stabbing with the blade up as shown here, but rather than the arms being back, the arms are forward.
Yeah.
Alternatively, then that could be the finish of Bangjukse. Apart from the finish of the Bangjukse, then there's no real forward high guard like that, especially not to take on a downwards cut to your head where you're making contact with the sword. Because I think the Bangjukse is designed as a counter cut instead.
I mean, the thing is when we look at the text as it's shown by Kansuke, those are the various different instances where Kansuke mentions you can use that, I wouldn't even say guard, use that position. These tend to be counters. I can't remember if there's blocks specifically, not from what I can see. That position, though, is actually a position that you often need to go to or close to that to be able to perform something called ukenagashi, which is the classic hanging block that you would see in Kenjutsu or in German longsword hangin. Do you have blocks like that as well with Korean sword?
So in the manual, then they don't explicitly say anything like that.
Yeah.
But they also don't say a lot about the basics. So I still teach it because I think it's a very useful, very versatile thing. And I think it's more a thing of it wasn't something they didn't do. It was more that they just weren't bothered to write it down because it's, well, everyone knows how to do this, so there you go kind of thing.
Because that's the thing I noticed actually reading through the Korean text is it's kind of like, do this position, then do that position, then do this. And there's not really any like why. What about you, Keith? In terms of that, I mean, that's in Chinese text, isn't it?
I mean, if you're talking about positions where you have the sword up, your hands high and the sword point forward, yeah, that does exist in Chong Song-Yo's manual. I'm not as familiar with Qi Guang's manual with the Shuang Shou Dao or the Chang Dao as he calls it. But most of the time with Chong Song-Yo or Cheng Chong Do, he likes to have the sword draped down much lower. And I think it's because he's not anticipating cuts coming from above, because every move in his manual is counter spear. He's not that worried about like blocking things smashing on his head. He's a lot more worried about stabs coming into his torso, right?
Oh, yeah. So now this was an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the points of contention that I had originally with another fella who also looks at historical Japanese texts. His name's Jerry, also called The Poor Historian on YouTube. Check him out. I'll put a link to his channel in the description. This was something that I was looking at in Cheng Zong-Yo's text, and I thought, I don't really remember, because Cheng Zong-Yo, the way he does it is quite low. It's like this, almost.
Yeah. There's a few ideas about this. One is that I've heard some people say that it's incorrect because he's not covering his head, right? So some people still think he should cover his head. However, once again, kind of one of the main ideas here is that you want to make sure the tip of the sword is quite low, because the whole purpose of this is to have the sword draping down, and then as a thrust comes in, you kind of wipe across your whole body with the blade to basically knock a spear aside.
Well, it's a longer blade too. It makes more sense to have it hanging like that, because if it's if it's a blade that length, if we're talking about a long blade like that and holding it up the way Kansuke is there in that illustration, I don't see that being I suppose, as practical as hanging it lower. But in my opinion, though, because it talks about in here, Kansuke mentions moving in defensively, which, if I remember correctly from Chung Zong Yo, he actually talks about using a sweep and moving in.
Yeah, he does. The main thing, though, is that with this is called the Mai Tou Shi, the burying headstands, and the main objective of this would be to bait in a thrust just by kind of opening your whole body up, but having the sword loaded to the side, ready to intercept. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that the follow-ups from it are done with one hand. So you kind of knock the sword or knock the spear aside, and then you do one-handed techniques with the sword.
I've tried to play around with that a fair bit, actually. Just when I was dabbling in the in Cheng Zong Yo stuff, and I found it actually really useful being able to do that, because then you can use the left hand to grab the spear itself and make sure they can't move back.
Yeah, because the whole problem with the spear is that point, as soon as you knock it aside, it'll just come back and circle back around. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. There's in this same text, Kansuke actually mentions it's a guard like this, but he actually shows it in contact with the opponent's blade, and he talks about there's an advantage in closing in and trapping their weapon with, and then what was it, grabbing with your left hand to then get the advantage with your right, aka your weapon hand. So, I mean. Sounds pretty similar to that to me. But yeah, I saw that when I saw it in Chung Zong Yo's manual, because his is a lot deeper and a lot lower. And I thought, I haven't really seen that much. But then when I started to think about weapon lengths and how that might affect the stance, and then I came across this in Kansuke's text, I sort of thought about it again. I thought, actually, no, that does make sense. So maybe there is something there.
I mean, if we're thinking, because the question on lots of people's minds would be are these things directly related, or are they convergent evolution? How do we think about all this, right? In some cases, it's likely that it could be a case of similar context breeds similar results, right? But in other cases, it could be, especially if it's much more specific, it could be where because Chung Zong Yo purportedly, learned from a Japanese master, unnamed Japanese master. It's part of his technique. So this could be something that he took on from the Kage-ryu or whatever it is he studied. He doesn't specify the name of the person or the style. But...
Yeah, and I think, obviously, I think you've highlighted something that's important to mention here, is that there's obviously a strong speculative nature in these kinds of conversation, because there's not really any real way of knowing for sure unless we actually have it written down somewhere exactly how they influenced each other. We do know they did because there are crossovers, and there's, I mean, even if you look at Kansuke's text, this same text we're looking at, he literally uses Chinese illustrations for all of the polearms except for the naginata.
Oh, yeah.
So it's hang on, what's going on there? And when you look at his fist and unarmed stuff, those are all guards that are also mentioned in Essentials of the Fist by Qi Guang.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it's
there's some cross-pollination, all kinds of directions.
if